everyone. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I am on today, the Yanawana, named for the life-giving waters of the San Antonio River, and to thank the many Indigenous people living here today, including members of the Tapilam Coyoltecan Nation and the Astacna Carrizo Comecrudo Nation. Drawing on recent scholarship theorizing Roman settler colonialism, I suggest in this talk that Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus can be fruitfully read through the lens of what Kathryn Yusoff calls the Black Anthropocene, a term that captures the iterative crises through which Indigenous homelands, lifeways, and worldviews are decimated, and through which Blackness comes to be associated with the materiality of devitalized nature. I further argue that through his manipulation of Ovid's Metamorphoses, the character of Aaron resists the extractive dynamics of the Black Anthropocene, including those of white humanism, and reclaims indigenous vitalism for those who are colonized and enslaved. Using decolonial methodologies, Daniel Padilla-Peralta argues that interconnected systems of slavery, colonization, and resource extraction in the Roman Empire led to the destruction of communities and their lands, ultimately causing the epistemicide that often attends the genocide of indigenous peoples and disrupts ancestral ways of knowing. Many of the communities colonized by Rome could be considered indigenous in the sense that they had a prior or more original claim to a place, with their lives shaped by place-based relationships connecting human and non-human beings. Because the Romans, in Padilla's words, dismembered other knowledge practices and systems, we can access these worldviews only as traces within a whitewashed humanist tradition, as what Padilla calls ghostly remainders of suffering and loss. Such ghostly remainders haunt Titus Andronicus and are conveyed primarily through Aaron, a character who reflects the fracturing of lifeways that occurred when slavery and colonization, in Padilla's words, severed individuals and communities from the environments in which their identities and knowledges had taken root and shape. Within the genre of revenge tragedy, Shakespeare presents Aaron's response to this systemic violence as vengeance. If we read against this white frame for traces of the worldviews of the colonized and the enslaved, however, Aaron emerges as an anti-colonial figure trapped within white discourses and histories, who exposes the Romans to the very epistemic and corporeal dismemberment, fragmentation, and appropriation experienced by those people they colonized and enslaved. One way this violence registers in Titus is through the devitalization of nature, a process that is central to racial capitalist transformation and that occurs when place-based ways of knowing are destroyed. And you see this devitalization here in this still from Julie Taymor's Titus. Titus initially presents a world characterized by flux, a vital materialism reflective of Ovid's Pythagorean belief in a shared life force. But this vitalism ultimately gives way to reified objectification. Not only does the forest cease to be bountiful, becoming ruthless, dreadful, deaf, and dull, but Ovidian myths lose their liberating, transformative potential. Lavinia's fate is patterned on that of Philomela, but she cannot become a nightingale after her rape, perhaps because the nightingale's habitat has been destroyed. She is instead left with her violated body, which is figured as a natural resource, a treasury to be mined, or a tree whom someone has lopped and hewed and made bare of her two branches. Given that vitalism is indebted to place-based modes of thought, Titus's depiction of environmental deanimation reflects not only capitalist change, but also the colonial destruction of indigenous lifeways. The myths that Ovid repurposes in the Metamorphoses were once integral to religious rituals and cults, and, as Laura Pucci contends, they functioned as active world-making forces, with each possessing a deep link to the community which, from generation to generation, transmits them. While Ovid participates in a broader trajectory in which myths are extracted from community-based knowledge systems, the Metamorphoses nonetheless retains the sense that all elements of the earth are joined by active interpenetrating energies. From this perspective, Titus's depiction of devitalized nature resonates with the crises of imperial racial capitalism that characterize the Black Anthropocene. Titus's treatment of race and coloniality, furthermore, reflects the ways that, as Laura Lahua Yim argues, race operates as a technology of settler colonialism. Racialized as Black, Aaron reflects how colonized people are assimilated into the state where they are positioned as racially subordinate subjects. Such racialization also indicates a colonial fear of Indigenous peoples who, as Scott Manning Stevens observes, were often depicted as monstrous, in part because of their innate connection to the lands coveted by would-be colonists and settlers. Aaron retains a connection to the land, which is most evident in his plan to raise his son in a cabin in a cave, where he will feed on berries and on roots, and feed on curds and whey, and suck the goat. Such harmony with the natural world is impossible in Rome, and we might speculate that Aaron's description reflects the lifeways from which he has been severed. Viewed from this perspective, Aaron returns the material and epistemological violence of colonization to the imperial core, retaliating against the Romans for their devastation of indigenous environments and knowledge systems, and for objectifying his own person through enslavement and the racialization that attends it. This dynamic informs the rape of Lavinia, which evokes the penetrative violence of mining, as the vaginal loathsome pit that Aaron fashions in the ground provides access to Rome's rich ornament. Aaron further evokes the eco-social destruction of mining when he hides gold among the nettles at the elder tree, thus supplanting the earth's natural abundance with a store of coins that will beget a very excellent piece of villainy. As Padilla maintains, Rome's Iberian mines were sites of acute genocidal violence, the environmental effects of which remain visible in the geological record. The mines caused cultural extinction because so many enslaved people died while laboring in them, and because they disturbed landscapes and the knowledge systems that arose in relation to them. Titus's Spanish resonance, conveyed, as Nouméa Ndaye argues, through Mateo Bandello's Moor of Mallorca, enhances this connection to Rome's Iberian mines and also to Spain's American mines, which replicated the violence of the Roman Empire. The eco-social costs of resource extraction in Titus thus cannot be disconnected from Shakespeare's treatment of imperial practices and their creation of racial hierarchies. By burying Aaron alive in the earth and maligning him as an inhuman dog, unhallowed slave, the Andronici ascribed to him the abjection of slavery and once again evoked the subterranean mines where enslaved people were forced to labor and die. Even from this compromised position, however, Aaron mobilizes the power of Indigenous worldviews to disrupt reified ontological categories, reclaiming vital materiality for those Black and Indigenous people from whose culture it originated. As Eric Aldebaran contends, Aaron is one of the few characters in the play who successfully enacts an Ovidian transformation. Rooted in the earth, Debarros argues, the quote, Ovidian snake-haired breeder and protector of life takes on new form as a raving, crying plant. Aaron thus emerges as a figure of resistance who reclaims and transmits Black Indigenous knowledges. Aaron furthermore exposes the devastating fragmentation that occurs when Indigenous knowledge is severed from its communities and incorporated piecemeal into new hostile power structures. As Linda Tuiwai Smith shows in her foundational work, Decolonizing Methodologies, the fragmentation of Indigenous communities and knowledge systems is a direct impact of colonization, which she describes as a process of systematic fragmentation, which can still be seen in the disciplinary carving up of the Indigenous world. Bones, mummies, and skulls to the museums, artwork to private collectors, languages to linguistics, customs to anthropologists, beliefs and behaviors to psychologists. Titus's severed heads, hand, and tongue may, perhaps, be read as akin to these bones, mummies, and skulls kept in museums, ultimately representative less of the play's Roman characters than of the many victims of ongoing genocides from the classical period to the present moment. As Smith demonstrates, this bodily dismemberment is inseparable from the colonial dismemberment of lifeways and worldviews, including the dismemberment of oral traditions that were integrated into the Western literary canon, a canon in which Titus is situated, but which it also meta-theatrically critiques. Thank you very much.